I stood in that hotel room at 2 in the morning, staring at my phone, my wife's goodnight text still glowing on the screen, while the ghost of a conversation I just had burned through every certainty I thought I'd built over the past 15 years. 4 hours earlier, the woman I'd loved in silence throughout medical school had finally looked me in the eyes and said the words I'd once desperately needed to hear. Except she was 15 years too late, and I was 15 years too married, and the cruelty of perfect timing had just revealed itself to be the most imperfect thing in the world. Her hands had trembled when she told me. Her voice had broken when she admitted she'd known all along how I felt, that she'd felt it too, that fear had kept her silent, that silence had cost her everything. And now I had to fly home in 6 hours and pretend that the past hadn't just reached through time and cracked something open inside me that I thought had healed long ago. My name is Marcus. I'm 42 years old and I work as a pediatric surgeon. I live in a quiet suburb outside a large city, not far from the hospital where I've spent most of my adult life working in operating rooms where the smallest hands I hold belong to patients who trust me with their lives. I've been in medicine for nearly 2 decades now. These days, my life is steady. Demanding, yes, suffocatingly so at times, but steady in the way that deep water is steady. You can't see the currents from the surface, but they're always there, pulling you in directions you didn't choose. I operate on children whose parents look at me like I'm their last hope. I teach residents who remind me of the terrified version of myself I used to be. I come home every evening to a house where my presence is expected, needed, woven into the fabric of routines I helped create. I know exactly who I am supposed to be and what my place in the world is supposed to mean. But it took a long time to get here. When people hear the words pediatric surgeon, they often imagine confidence, certainty, someone who always knew their path, someone who was born with steady hands and an unshakable sense of purpose. That wasn't me. Not at the beginning, not even close. Like most doctors, I started out unsure, exhausted, and quietly terrified of getting things wrong, of being the reason a family's worst fear came true. Back then, I was just a medical student trying to survive long nights, endless exams, and the pressure of becoming someone my future patients could trust with something as fragile as their child's life. That was when I met Sophia. We were both in medical school, moving through the same brutal schedule, the same impossible expectations. She was studying pediatrics, and even then, in those early chaotic years, it was obvious she belonged in that field. She had this calm presence that put people at ease, not in a performative way but naturally, like breathing. She wasn't flashy or loud. She didn't need to be. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, people leaned in. They paid attention. There was a gravity to her that I couldn't name back then, but I felt it every time I was near her. Sophia was beautiful, but not in an exaggerated, magazine cover way. It was something softer, deeper, more dangerous because it snuck up on you. The kind of beauty that made people feel drawn to her without quite understanding why. Everyone noticed her. Students lingered in conversations with her. Professors remembered her name after one lecture. Residents who barely acknowledged anyone else would pause when she walked into a room. She was admired, respected, and quietly desired by more than a few people. I was one of them, though I told myself I wasn't, that I was different somehow, that my feelings were more evolved, more patient, more deserving. At first, we became friends almost accidentally. We studied together because we were in the same rotation. We shared notes because it made sense. We complained about impossible schedules because everyone did. We'd grab quick meals between lectures, coffee during late-night library sessions, moments stolen from the relentless forward march of medical training. Nothing dramatic, nothing that announced itself as significant. Just two people moving through the same exhausting routine, finding small pockets of comfort in each other's company. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was falling for her. Slowly at first, so slowly I could almost pretend it wasn't happening. Then deeply, achingly, in a way that didn't feel temporary or casual or like something I could walk away from. I never rushed it. I wasn't the type. I believed in patience, in presence, in the quiet dignity of waiting for the right moment. I believed that if I was steady enough, if I showed her who I really was, if I proved myself trustworthy and kind and reliable, Things might eventually change between us. I believed timing was everything. I was wrong. I listened when she talked about her fears, about the pressure of choosing the right specialty, about the terror of failing a patient one day. I supported her when she doubted herself, when she questioned whether she was strong enough for this field, smart enough, resilient enough. I was there when she needed help, when she needed silence, when she needed someone who wouldn't expect anything in return. And that was the problem, wasn't it? I never expected anything. I never asked for anything. And she never offered more. Sophia treated me warmly, kindly, honestly. She trusted me in ways she didn't trust others. She called me first when something went wrong. She texted me when she was overwhelmed. She made space for me in her life in every way except the one I wanted most. But there was always a line she never crossed, a distance she maintained without ever naming it, without ever acknowledging that she was doing it deliberately. Looking back now, it's obvious. Back then, I kept telling myself that timing mattered, that patience was a virtue, that things would fall into place eventually if I just waited long enough. They never did. I tried in my own restrained, cowardly way to show her how I felt. Nothing dramatic, just small gestures, lingering conversations, honest compliments delivered with carefully measured casualness. Moments where I hoped she might see me differently, might feel the shift I was desperately trying to create. She noticed, I'm sure of that now, but she never responded in the way I hoped. And I never pushed, never forced the issue, never risked the friendship by asking for more. By the time we finished medical school, reality took over in the way it always does. Residencies didn't wait for emotions to settle. They didn't care about unfinished business or unspoken feelings. We were assigned to different hospitals, different cities, different lives. We hugged goodbye in the parking lot after graduation, surrounded by families celebrating and classmates making promises they wouldn't keep. We promised to stay in touch, and we meant it. For a while, we did. Then the messages became shorter, less frequent, weighed down by exhaustion and time zone differences, and the way life pulls people apart without asking permission. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Life moved on because that's what life does. It doesn't wait for you to process your feelings or make peace with your losses. My early years as a doctor were brutal in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Long shifts that blurred into each other until I couldn't remember what day it was. First surgeries where I stood at the table with a scalpel in my hand and a child's life depending on decisions I wasn't sure I was qualified to make. Nights spent replaying every decision in my head, wondering if I'd done enough, if I'd missed something, if I was the reason someone's child didn't wake up the way they were supposed to. Pediatric surgery doesn't allow mistakes. Children don't give you room for doubt. They force you to grow up fast, to become someone capable of carrying the weight of other people's worst nightmares without breaking. I did. I grew up. I became that person. Somewhere in those years, Sophia became a quiet memory, not painful, not romanticized, just a chapter that never quite closed but didn't demand attention either. I built a career. I built a life. I learned how to carry responsibility without letting it crush me, how to walk out of an operating room where I just saved a child's life and still go home feeling like I could have done more. And I didn't know then that years later, a single moment in a conference center hallway would bring all of it back, would tear open something I thought had healed, would show me exactly what silence costs when you let it stretch on for too long. Looking back now, I can admit something I couldn't admit back then, something that would have felt like defeat to acknowledge. I knew I was in the friend zone long before I was willing to say it out loud. I just didn't want to accept what that really meant, what it said about me, about her, about the way we moved around each other in carefully maintained circles that never quite intersected the way I wanted them to. During our final years in medical school, Sophia and I grew even closer, at least on the surface, in the ways that didn't threaten the careful balance we'd established. We spent hours together studying, talking, decompressing after exams that left us both feeling hollowed out and uncertain. We knew each other's routines, moods, habits, the small tells that signaled when one of us was close to breaking. She would text me when she was overwhelmed, when the pressure became too much, when she needed someone to remind her why she'd chosen this impossible path. I was usually the first person she called when something didn't go as planned, when a patient took a turn, when doubt crept in and whispered that maybe she wasn't cut out for this after all. I was the safe place, the constant, the one who never asked for more than she was willing to give. And I convinced myself that this mattered more than labels, more than definitions, more than the aching want that sat in my chest every time she smiled at someone else the way I wished she'd smile at me. She talked to me about everything. Her doubts about pediatrics, whether she was choosing it for the right reasons or just because it seemed noble. Her fear of failing patients, of making the wrong call, of being responsible for permanent damage to a child who trusted her. Her frustration with people who underestimated her because of her calm demeanor, who mistook quietness for weakness. Sometimes she mentioned men who tried to get close to her, not in detail, just enough for me to understand that I wasn't the only one who saw her that way, who felt the pull of her presence. I listened. I always listened. I told myself that listening was enough, that being trusted with her fears made me special, made me different from all the others who wanted something from her. There were moments when I thought something might change. Late nights when we were the only two left in the library, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, our textbooks spread across the table like evidence of a crime we were both committing against our own health. Quiet walks across campus after long shifts, the air cold enough to see our breath, her shoulders sometimes brushing against mine, in a way that felt deliberate even though I knew it wasn't. Times when she would rest her head back against the wall and sigh, saying she felt safe around me, that I was one of the only people who didn't make her feel like she had to perform or pretend or be anything other than exhausted and uncertain. Those words stayed with me longer than they should have. I read into everything. A smile held a second too long, a touch on my arm that lingered just past casual, a laugh that felt more intimate than usual, like she was sharing something with me that no one else got to hear. I kept thinking maybe she just needs time. Maybe she's not ready for anything complicated right now. Maybe I'm different from the others. Maybe patience is the answer, but the truth was simpler and harder. She liked me. She trusted me. She valued me. She just didn't love me the way I loved her, didn't want me the way I wanted her, didn't lie awake at night thinking about what it would be like if we crossed that line. I never confessed directly, not because I was afraid of rejection, but because I was afraid of changing what we already had, of losing even the partial version of her I'd been allowed to keep. I told myself that staying close was better than risking losing her altogether. That patience was a virtue. That timing could fix anything. It can't. Silence just builds walls that look like understanding until you're standing on opposite sides wondering when everything shifted. Toward the end of our studies, life became more fragmented. We were assigned to different rotations, different hospitals, different schedules that rarely lined up anymore. The intensity of medical training left little room for emotional clarity or difficult conversations. We were both exhausted, stretched thin, running on caffeine and ambition, and the stubborn refusal to admit that maybe we weren't as invincible as we'd once believed. One evening, after a particularly long day, we sat on the steps outside the medical building. The campus was quiet, almost empty, the kind of stillness that only comes after everyone else has already gone home. She talked about her plans after graduation, the hospitals she was considering, the city she wanted to move to, the life she was going to build. None of them included me. None of them were the same as mine. I remember nodding, pretending this didn't hurt, pretending I wasn't watching the future I'd imagined dissolve in real time. That night, I almost told her everything. I felt it sitting in my chest, heavy and urgent, demanding to be said. The words were right there, pressed against the back of my teeth. But she stood up before I could speak, smiled at me with that familiar warmth that never quite reached the place I wanted it to, and thanked me for always being there. She hugged me. A friendly hug, familiar, comfortable, absolutely platonic. That was when I knew. That was when I finally understood that no amount of waiting was going to change what we were to each other. After graduation, things change quickly. Residencies don't wait for emotions to settle. They don't care about goodbyes or unfinished business or hearts that haven't figured out how to let go yet. They take over your life completely, demanding everything you have and more. I moved to a different city for my training. She stayed where she was. At first, we stayed in touch, messages every few days, updates about long shifts and difficult cases, and small victories that felt enormous in the moment. Then the messages became shorter. Weeks passed between responses, then months. There was no argument, no dramatic ending, no final conversation where we acknowledged what was happening. Just distance, physical and emotional, life pulling us in different directions without asking permission or offering alternatives. My first years as a resident were relentless in ways that reshaped me completely. I barely slept. I barely ate. I barely thought about anything outside the hospital walls. The responsibility was overwhelming, suffocating, impossible to escape. The first time I stood in an operating room knowing the outcome depended entirely on my hands, my decisions, my ability to stay calm when everything inside me was screaming, I felt something shift inside me permanently. I was no longer a student. I was accountable. Lives depended on me now, and that weight never lifts, never gets lighter. You just get stronger at carrying it. During those years, I dated briefly, casually, nothing serious at first. I was focused on surviving my training, on becoming competent, on proving to myself that I deserved to be there, that I wasn't going to be the weak link who couldn't handle the pressure. Love felt like something for another version of me, someone with more time and fewer doubts and a life that wasn't entirely consumed by the hospital. Sophia faded into the background of my life. Not erased, just quiet. Occasionally, I'd see her name pop up on social media, a photo from a conference, a professional achievement, evidence that she was thriving, that she was exactly where she'd always planned to be. I was proud of her in the distant way you're proud of someone you used to know well but don't anymore. It didn't hurt. It just was. Eventually, my life opened up. I finished my residency. I accepted a position that challenged me but also gave me room to breathe, to be something other than a doctor in training. That's when I met my future wife. It happened slowly, naturally, without games or uncertainty or the exhausting dance of trying to figure out where you stand. We met through mutual friends. We talked. We laughed. We kept seeing each other because it felt easy and right and uncomplicated in the best possible way. There was honesty between us from the start. No guessing. No emotional imbalance. She wasn't part of my past. She wasn't someone I had to prove myself to or win over or wait patiently for. She met me as I was in that moment, tired and dedicated and emotionally guarded but honest. Our relationship grew slowly, intentionally. We talked about expectations early, about schedules and sacrifices, and what it meant to be married to someone whose job demanded irregular hours and sudden emergencies. She understood without resentment. And I learned how to be present when I was home, how to truly show up instead of just being physically there while my mind remained at the hospital. We got married quietly. No spectacle, just family and close friends and the feeling that we were choosing something solid, something real, something built on mutual respect rather than desperate longing. We built a home together. We created routines. We shared responsibilities. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable, and stability after years of uncertainty felt like a gift I didn't take for granted. During those years, I rarely thought about Sophia. That might sound cold, but it's true. She wasn't pushed away or deliberately forgotten. She simply belonged to another version of my life, a younger one, a less grounded one, a version that didn't know yet how to ask for what it wanted or walk away when waiting became pointless. Occasionally, I'd hear her name through professional circles or see her mentioned at pediatric conferences. She was doing well, advancing quickly, respected in her field. I felt nothing but quiet respect, the kind you feel for colleagues whose paths briefly intersected with yours before diverging completely. As my career progressed, I became more involved in academic medicine. I started teaching, speaking at conferences, sharing experiences with younger doctors who reminded me of myself, who carried the same fear in their eyes that I used to see in the mirror. I traveled occasionally for medical events, but never far enough or long enough to disrupt my family life. At home, things were good. We weren't perfect. We had our tensions and disagreements and moments of disconnect, but we were honest with each other. I didn't feel like I was missing anything. I had a career that mattered and a family that grounded me. That combination is rare in medicine, and I knew how fortunate I was. Time moved forward the way it always does, quietly, without asking permission, without warning you when something significant is about to happen. Then came the invitation. A national medical conference in another city. A gathering of specialists, researchers, surgeons. A chance to present some of my work and participate in panel discussions. It was routine, the kind of professional obligation I'd fulfilled dozens of times before. I didn't hesitate to accept. I told my wife it would be a short trip, 2 days, one overnight stay, nothing unusual. She smiled, wished me luck, reminded me to call when I landed. I packed my bag without thinking much of it. No anticipation, no sense that anything unexpected might happen. I had no idea that this ordinary trip would reopen a chapter I'd believed was already closed, that 15 years of carefully constructed stability was about to crack open and show me exactly what I'd been avoiding looking at. The conference was exactly what I expected it to be. Large halls filled with name badges and polite conversation. Familiar faces from past events. Panel discussions that covered the same ground we always covered, just with slightly updated research. I presented my work, answered questions, shook hands, moved from one session to another on autopilot. These events had become routine for me over the years, stimulating enough to justify the travel but emotionally neutral, forgettable the moment they ended. It was during a short break between sessions that everything shifted. I was standing near the back of the hall, scrolling through my phone, checking messages from home, when I looked up and saw her. Sophia. There was no slow realization, no gradual recognition. I knew instantly. Time had changed her, of course it had. 15 years changes everyone, but not enough to make her unrecognizable. Her hair was shorter now, cut in a way that framed her face differently, more professional somehow. Her posture was more confident, shoulders back, chin up, the bearing of someone who'd earned their place in the world. But the same calm expression, the same composed presence that had always made people want to be near her. She was speaking with a colleague, nodding as she listened, and I could see it, the way the other person leaned in slightly, the way they seemed to value whatever she was saying. Exactly the way it used to be. I felt something tighten in my chest, not pain exactly, not longing, just recognition. The sudden awareness that the past isn't as far behind you as you think it is. She looked up and our eyes met. For a brief moment, neither of us moved. The noise of the conference faded into background static. Then she smiled, not politely, not professionally, genuinely. Recognition and warmth and something else I couldn't name. "Marcus," she said, stepping closer, weaving through the crowd. Her voice was the same. A little lower maybe, seasoned by years of speaking with authority, but unmistakably hers. "I can't believe it's you." I smiled back, feeling my face arrange itself into an expression of pleasant surprise. "Sophia, it's been a long time." Up close I noticed the small details. Fine lines around her eyes, not from age but from experience, from years of making decisions and carrying weight. She looked accomplished, grounded, like someone who had lived a full life and earned every moment of it. We talked briefly, carefully at first. The surface facts, where we worked, what we specialized in, the kind of conversation people have when they're unsure how much of the past is allowed into the present. She told me she was speaking later that afternoon. I told her I was on a panel the next morning. It all felt strangely formal considering how much history we shared, how many hours we'd spent together, how well I'd once known the rhythm of her thoughts. Before we separated, she hesitated for just a second. Her hand moved slightly, like she was going to touch my arm but stopped herself. "Would you like to grab a coffee after the conference?" she asked. "If you have time, I mean if you're not rushing back." I didn't hesitate. Yes, I'd like that. The rest of the day passed differently. I stayed focused on the presentations, participated in discussions, maintained my professional facade. But there was an awareness now humming beneath everything, a quiet anticipation I hadn't felt in years. Not excitement exactly, just curiosity. The pull of unfinished business asserting itself after lying dormant for so long. After the final session, we met outside the conference center. The city was unfamiliar to both of us, which somehow made it easier. Neutral ground. No memories attached to the streets or buildings. No ghosts waiting on familiar corners. We walked to a small cafe nearby. Nothing special, just a quiet place where we could sit and talk without the professional mask of the conference. At first we talked about work, safe territory. We discussed how medicine had changed, how the pressure had intensified, how burnout was becoming an epidemic among healthcare workers. She spoke with authority and clarity. Her career had clearly flourished. She was respected, accomplished, exactly where she wanted to be professionally. When she talked about her research, about the programs she'd developed, I could hear the pride in her voice. She'd built something meaningful. When the conversation drifted toward personal life, she paused. The energy shifted. She looked down at her cup, fingers tracing the rim absently. "And you?" she asked, looking up at me. "Are you happy?" The question was simple, but it carried weight, years of weight. I could feel everything it was really asking beneath those 3 words. "Yes," I said honestly. I'm married, I have a family, my life is full." She nodded slowly, taking this in. "That's good," she said, but her voice softened, became quieter, more vulnerable. "I'm glad you found that." She told me about her life after medical school, and as she spoke, I could hear the careful editing, the practiced way of discussing difficult things. The opportunities she'd taken, the sacrifices she'd made. She spoke about her professional success with pride, but when the topic shifted to relationships, her words became measured, weighed down by things she wasn't saying. "I was married twice," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "Neither worked out." She didn't go into details, she didn't need to. The way she said it, the tightness in her voice told me enough. There was regret there, loss, the kind that comes from making choices you can't unmake. There was a long pause between us, not awkward exactly, just heavy. The air felt thick with everything we weren't saying, everything we'd never said. Then, unexpectedly, her eyes filled with tears. She blinked rapidly, trying to stop them, but they came anyway. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice breaking in a way I'd never heard before, something I never said back then. I didn't interrupt her. Something in my chest tightened. I could feel my pulse in my throat. She took a breath, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and looked at me. Really looked at me. The way she never had before. "I knew," she said, and the words came out like a confession, like something she'd been carrying for years and could finally set down. "I knew how you felt about me. I saw it. I felt it. And the truth is, I liked you too, more than I ever admitted to you, more than I ever admitted to myself." My heart started beating faster, but I stayed silent. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, the careful stability I'd built starting to crack. "I was afraid," she continued, and now the tears were falling freely. Her voice was raw, unguarded in a way that made me want to look away, but I couldn't. "I was afraid of choosing the wrong thing, afraid of slowing down, afraid of letting something real distract me from the life I thought I was supposed to build. I thought I had to choose between love and success, between you and my career. And I chose the career because that felt safer, because I could control that, because I thought there would be time for everything else later." She laughed softly, bitterly, through her tears. "Turns out silence has consequences too. Turns out choosing nothing is still a choice. And I made it. Every day I made it by not saying anything, by keeping you at that distance, by pretending I didn't see what was right in front of me." When she heard more about my life, about my family, about the stability I'd found, something in her broke completely. She cried openly then, not quietly, not with restraint. Full, wrenching sobs that made the few other people in the cafe glance over with concern. Not because she wanted what I had, but because she realized she couldn't go back. Because she was standing in the rubble of choices she couldn't unmake, looking at the life she'd convinced herself she didn't want, and realizing too late that she'd been lying to herself the whole time. I think part of me hoped, she admitted between sobs, that maybe we'd meet again one day and things would be different, that maybe you'd still be single, that maybe we'd get a second chance. I know how pathetic that sounds. I know I gave up any right to hope for that when I stayed silent all those years ago, but I couldn't stop hoping anyway. I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. Sadness for her, deep and aching. Gratitude for my life, for the choices I'd made after her. Relief that I didn't have to choose anything in this moment, that my life was already decided, already built. And underneath it all, anger. Not explosive anger, but the quiet, bitter kind. Anger at the waste of it. Anger at how easily this could have been different. Anger at fear, at silence, at the way timing can ruin everything even when the feelings are real. We didn't touch. We didn't cross any lines. I didn't reach across the table to hold her hand or comfort her. That wouldn't have been appropriate, wouldn't have been fair to anyone. We just sat there as two adults acknowledging a truth that had arrived 15 years too late to matter, too late to change anything but still demanding to be spoken. "I'm sorry," I said finally, and I meant it. "I'm sorry it happened this way." She wiped her eyes, tried to compose herself. "Don't be sorry. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one who stayed silent. I'm the one who was too afraid. You deserved better than that." We sat for a while longer, but the conversation had exhausted itself. There was nothing left to say that would change anything. Eventually, the cafe started closing. We had to leave. When we finally stood to leave, the city lights had come on, casting everything in that artificial glow that makes real life look like a stage set. She hugged me briefly, carefully, making sure nothing about the embrace could be misinterpreted. "I'm glad you're happy," she said, pulling back, her eyes red but steady now. "I mean that. I'm glad one of us got it right." "I know," I said, and this time I believed her. Back in my hotel room that night, I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, thinking, remembering, processing. I felt like I'd been handed the answer to a test I'd already failed years ago, except the answer didn't matter anymore because the test was long over and the grades had already been recorded. I realized something important, something I'd been avoiding for 15 years. Some stories aren't meant to be continued. They're meant to be understood. They're meant to teach you something about yourself, about silence, about the cost of waiting too long to say what needs to be said. I thought about the version of me who'd loved her, the one who'd waited patiently and convinced himself that patience was noble. I felt sorry for him. He deserved better than silence. He deserved a real answer, yes or no, not the limbo of maybe someday that had kept him hoping long past the point where hope made sense. I flew home the next morning. The airport felt louder than usual, overwhelming in a way it normally wasn't. The constant movement of strangers going somewhere important to them, announcements echoing off tile floors, children crying, couples arguing, all of it pressing in on me. Even though nothing had physically changed, even though I was still the same person I'd been when I arrived, I felt different. I was carrying something back with me that I hadn't brought with me, some new understanding of who I'd been and who I'd become. Sophia and I didn't see each other again after that evening. There were no follow-up messages, no promises to stay in touch this time. We both understood that the conversation we'd had didn't need an extension. It had already said everything it was meant to say. It had closed something that had been left open for too long, and now it was time to let it stay closed. On the plane, I stared out the window at clouds that looked solid enough to walk on and replayed our conversation in my mind. Not dramatically, not obsessively, just calmly, honestly. I realized how close we had come years ago to a completely different life. Not necessarily a better one, probably not actually, but a different one. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge what had happened back then without the protective distance I'd always maintained. I hadn't failed to win her over. She hadn't rejected me. We had both made choices based on fear and ambition and timing more than feelings had decided the outcome. We had both been too afraid to risk what we had for what we might have had. When I landed, I called my wife as I always did. The familiar rhythm of it felt grounding. I told her I was home. She asked how the conference went. I said it was productive. That part was true. I didn't mention Sophia, not because I was hiding anything, but because nothing had happened that needed to be explained. The past had spoken, and it had stayed where it belonged. It had made its presence known, acknowledged its weight, and then stepped back into history where it was always meant to remain. When I walked through the front door, my life met me exactly as I had left it. Familiar sounds, familiar faces, familiar smells of home. The quiet rhythm of a house that had been built over years, not imagined in moments. I hugged my wife, held my children, and felt something settle inside me. A piece that had been slightly loose, slightly unmoored, clicking back into place. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat alone for a while in the dark living room, listening to the house breathe around me. I thought about Sophia, about the version of her I had loved, about the version of myself who had waited. I felt sadness for her. Truly, not pity, but genuine sadness. She had achieved everything she set out to achieve professionally, had built an impressive career, had helped countless children, had made her mark on her field. But personal happiness doesn't follow a career plan. Success at work doesn't fill the spaces that love is supposed to occupy. She'd learned that the hard way, and there was no going back to make different choices. A few days later, she sent me a short message, just a few lines. "I'm glad we talked. I needed that more than I realized. Take care of yourself." I replied just as simply, "I'm glad too. I wish you peace," and that was it. No reopening, no lingering conversation, just closure, clean and final. As the weeks passed, the emotional weight faded. Not because it wasn't important, but because it had found its place. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel like I'd missed out on something better. I felt clarity. Some people are meant to be part of our formation, not our future. They teach us what we need to learn and then they leave, and that's exactly what's supposed to happen. Looking back now, I understand something I didn't when I was younger, something that medical school never taught me but life eventually did. Love isn't just about feeling something deeply. It's about choosing, acting, and being willing to risk uncertainty. It's about speaking up when it matters instead of convincing yourself that silence is patience. Silence isn't patience. Silence is just fear wearing a more dignified name. And silence can protect you in the moment, but it can also quietly shape your entire life in ways you don't recognize until it's too late to reshape it. Sophia taught me that without meaning to. She taught me what happens when you wait too long, when you let fear make your decisions, when you convince yourself that there will always be more time to say what needs to be said. There isn't. There never is. Today, I'm still a pediatric surgeon. I still carry the responsibility of fragile lives every day. I still walk into operating rooms where parents look at me with desperate hope and trust me with their most precious thing. I still come home tired, sometimes emotionally drained by the weight of what I do, sometimes proud of the lives I've saved. But I come home to a life I chose actively, not one I wondered about from a distance. A life I built with honesty and presence, and the willingness to risk being rejected in order to have something real. That encounter didn't shake my marriage or my sense of self. It didn't make me question my choices or wish I could go back and do things differently. It reinforced everything I'd built. It reminded me that happiness isn't found in revisiting old paths or wondering what might have been. It's found in fully walking the path you're already on, in being present for the life you've chosen, in not letting fear keep you silent when words could change everything. We ran into each other after many years. She said what she once stayed silent about, and I listened, and then I went home knowing exactly where I belong. The past had its moment. It said what it needed to say. And then I closed that door and walked back into my present, grateful for the family I have, the life I've built, and the man I became after I stopped waiting for someone else to choose me and started choosing myself instead.